If we take from Andre Breton's definition and everything and just boil it down into the simplest terms, taken from his 1924 manifesto, the Manifesto of Surrealism, what Surrealism is the art of bringing the dream consciousness, the dream logic, the dream itself into conscious reality. That is what Surrealism is. And that's where we get into the difference between Dadaism and absurdism. With Dadaism itself was more of a political response. It was a political reactionary response. The momentum behind the movement was to bring out the absurdity in daily life because it was a response to World War One and how everyone took all of their shit so seriously. When we look back on it now, we realized it was just, a bunch of different countries dick swinging and saber rattling, and millions of people died for this. And so Dadaism was a response to that, in which it brought out the absurdity of what we took so seriously. And absurdism evolved from that, sort of, in just like pointing out how absurd everything is absolutely, but there's no point to it. And what makes surrealism different is that there is a point to all of it, and what the point is to bring that dreamlike state into conscious reality. It's to bring that dream logic, those dream things, into conscious reality, whether or not it's for purposes like occult reasons, which is what we're going to explore now, or whether it's for just aesthetic purposes. With the Surrealist Manifesto, Rene Breton actually went and labeled what exactly is surrealism and the purposes of it. Because with the bringing of the dream into conscious reality, he argues that it serves a much greater purpose than just arbitrarily writing and forcing someone who is not interested in someone into your dream, into your world. He had given the example from Fyodor Dostoevsky, that his room was fucking boring. It was a boring ass room that he's fucking describing, and no one cares about this fucking room, and yet you're forcing me as a listener to walk into this room. Make it interesting. And with what Breton was talking about with surrealism, it serves a purpose. Like, you are supposed to interest me as a writer. You are supposed to interest me as a painter. Like, you are bringing the absurdity of the dream into reality, and yet it still has a logical foundation. Like, it's not just absurdism and just that whole random bullshit that people bring up. There is a logic to it. It makes sense. My point is that surrealism has a purpose, and it's about altered consciousness. And it's about bringing altered consciousness into conscious state. Whether or not you consider it a dream or a revelation or an epiphany or bringing the hypnagogic state. There were a lot of experimentations that were done by people like Salvador Dali in regards to the hypnagogic state, because one of the experiments that he would do was he would hold a spoon in his hand or a bell in his hand and then fall asleep in a chair, and then when he let go of the bell or the spoon, it would clatter to the floor, which would wake him up, and then he would then begin to paint these things that he saw. But going back with what René Magritte had done, there is a logic to his painting. There's a logic to a lot of surrealist paintings. There's a painting of a train that is coming out from a fireplace, and it makes a sort of logical sense as far as you're following dream logic. And so what that dream logic is so a fireplace represents a tunnel, and from that, what comes from tunnels, trains come from tunnels. That makes logical sense. It's not just the absurdism of just throwing random objects together and hoping something sticks. There is a pattern to it, and it's through this pattern that we are here, that we are attempting to work with surrealism as a form of occult expression. And so it is with those constructs that we are working within an occult subset. We have these Jungian archetypes. We have things that mean certain things to us. Like, as a upright walking primate, fire and arrows mean certain things to us that is pretty fucking universal. And so it's using these archetypes that we are tapping into the collective subconscious. We are writing in the language of the subconscious. We are no longer getting into that form of gnosis, that we're all familiar with as chaos magicians. We're not utilizing gnosis because gnosis is the middleman. So what we're doing essentially is writing and painting and things like this in the language of the dream, in the language of the other consciousness. So this is where we get into like different techniques that are utilized in order to do things. I had discussed previously the concept of cognitive leaping. So if I bring up Mount Everest and you say the first thing that comes to your mind, like I don't consider that a form of gnosis. Gnosis itself, or getting into more technical terminology like trance or ecstasis, requires a refractory time period. There's something that you have to like perform or do in order to get into that state. Whereas when you're coming up with things off the top of your head, you are not getting into that state. You are just coming up with the first correlation that comes to your mind. Utilizing surrealism in an occult context is not something that is done or that would be done by a novice in magic altogether. It would be like more of an advanced technique, because by becoming a magician and obtaining that concept of magical thinking, that is what you are tapping into. It is a very accessible inroad, but you have to at least have cultivated a sense of magical thinking. That is what I would differentiate between surrealist gnosis, whatever, versus like actual gnosis. Surrealist gnosis is magical thinking. It's not quite as deep as gnosis. The difference between the two, and I can say this from personal experience, is a lot of the time when I'm in gnosis and doing something like an invocation or something, I have trouble remembering what exactly I did, because the part of my brain that is like going on autopilot at that point is not sending the same signals that relays like what I can remember. So if I'm doing an invocation, I'm not going to exactly remember what exactly was said during that invocation when I become banished. However, within a surrealist mindset, what I can do in that surrealist magical thinking, I can sit there and like piece apart after I had written something, like what exactly each thing meant. After I had written a piece of surrealist writing, I could very easily tell you what each thing had represented, how I had come to that logical conclusion, whereas in a Gnostic or ecstatic or trance state, I'm not going to be able to tell you how I came to that conclusion. Here's an example of something that I had written years ago that I have no idea anymore what the fuck I was talking about. Communique has reached null set as I predicted. Whether your fault or mine is not at an issue, for this is the season for textual compression. Cancerous, equal thought may also be blamed. I must say, though, that this capital upscore address has left its doppelganger. Drenched in piano and lost rooftops, I wish to show you my fabulous driving. Inky, preferably. Do you agree? I have decided to skip next week. I may have forgotten to tell you. Expect me to descend upwards, or west pointwards, to purchase handled lashings. As I have already told the Tree of Peace, as difficult as I know it will be, it's something that I know I need, and when the softness of my bones begins to falter, I know that I am closer to home. Speaking of which, I so dearly wish that you can find a working skull, albeit with a little difficulty. It does not rest me well that rest is not well. Dream a little softer now. The world outside of palms should not be as gentle. I don't think that you'll ever know how much those nights meant to me. Soon, I hope. Very soon. Although by my hand banned to the depths of cognitive therapy, I am still haunted by the screams of Peter Lorre. For reasons unknown to me, Peter Lorre believes that I harbor disingenuousness. This has kept me from color and from the heights of dead soldiers. Can you believe that I spent Helios in the want of Luna? More on this later. Jack. I cannot tell you for the life of me what any of this meant. And that is why that it's important to disseminate this as much to people as possible, because of the concept of archetypes, because of the concept of the collective unconscious. You are spreading these things to as many people as possible, thus enacting your will as broadly as possible. So that is surrealism and the occult use of it. You are obfuscating the purpose of what you are doing. You are basically like creating. You are bypassing gnosis in a way, by use of magical thinking in what you are creating, and thus you are spreading it outward. That is how you disseminate it. So each poem you write, each thing that you write, each thing that you paint is in essence a sigil, is in essence a spell, is something. And it is going to be more effective, more potent, the more you disseminate it, depending upon how, powerful you want it to be. The example that I had given in my abstract was using the poem Yucatan. The purpose of the poem Yucatan was to destroy or at least move past the personal depression that I was suffering. And the further I spread this to other people, the more likely that depression would disappear, which, fucking spoiler, it has. I have been a lot happier, and I have been significantly more productive, and all of this shit since having written this and disseminated it to as many people as I could. The purpose of it is hidden within there. But as I discussed in the abstract, the inherent purpose is within it, but without knowing the inherent meaning, it's just going to be like an ambiguous feeling that you get as a reader or listener to the poem. So with Yucatan, it starts, "The pain is ethereal, welling from beneath my golden-notched sternum. Pressure crescendos against flesh, bubbling beneath my wet wooden ribs. Fever crunch cartilage strains against folly. Bowing bones groan a concerto of longing through my spine, as my drum-thin skin hums and split shrieks. Ribs shiver daybreak, they crack and splay. My swollen heart is free. It does not beat." Without knowing the intention of what I had created with that poem, you still get the idea of what it was for, sort of, as a kind of ambiguous feeling that kind of floats through the entirety of the poem. And so you as a listener or reader understand its intent, you understand its emotion. That's your job as a poet or writer, is to bring that emotion, that dream logic, that unconscious logic to the surface of what you're talking about, because there are a lot of times I've had dreams where I didn't quite understand anything but the emotion that I was feeling. It is your job, when you are creating this written sigil, it is your job to try and encapsulate it as best you can. However, that's why you're writing it. You are doing magic. The purpose of it is for creating magic. So it doesn't always have to be emotional. It could be something for results magic. It could be something for a grander thing. But it's your job trying to evoke this into your sigilized piece to get as close to that as possible. In essence, writing in the language of gnosis, which is bringing that and encoding it as you write it, as you paint it, as you sculpt it, as you film it or create music out of it. You are putting your intent into it as you are doing it. As you are encoding it, that is what is bypassing the Gnostic state and allowing it, since it's written in this kind of dreamies, subconscious language, it's going to be understood by the others that you disseminate it to on a subconscious level. You're going to basically the minute someone else reads your thing or witnesses your thing, they become part of your ritual, because their consciousness then becomes imbued with the qualities that you had expressed through the use of your art. You had gotten into the magical state of mind where you had put your intention into something, and your conscious mind was able to pull that out of the subconscious language. And the further it goes on, the more you're likely to forget what that was as you proceed through your journey.